This is what our Ruth Stout bed looks like before I prep it for the next growing season. Guten gardening, everybody. Now behind me is our Ruth Stout bed, a bed that we've been growing potatoes in for the past 5 seasons. And today I'm going to go ahead and prep that bed for next season, get it going, because I want to give the hay that I'm going to put on here plenty of time to, well, break down as much as it's going to, which probably isn't a lot, but settle itself in as we get ready for the winter. And it's going to be out here all winter going through that decomposing or that breaking down process, just like the rest of the hay that's already in there. But I thought I would use this video as an opportunity to talk about some of the questions that have come up in other Ruth Stout harvest videos and really talk about some of the experiences we've had so you can see what you're getting into if you're going to be growing potatoes in just hay or some other organic matter. Now, of course, one of the benefits of growing in a Ruth Stout bed is that I'm not relying on the native soil in order to grow my potatoes. In fact, I can lift this up just a little bit here. I've got a hardwire cloth underneath here, underneath my Ruth Stout bed, and you can see the native soil underneath there, but everything is on top of that hardware cloth. Now, I made that decision 2 seasons ago to put some hardware cloth in here simply to try to create just another barrier for the voles that had come out and really get into our Ruth Stout bed. And I'll say this season we didn't have vole damage whatsoever, so I can tell you that it has been helpful. So I'm not necessarily going to suggest that you have to put some hardware cloth down underneath your Ruth Stout bed, but for us, we deal with voles all the time. We deal with those critters that helped a lot. Now, that being said, the current depth after harvest of our Ruth Stout bed, once you see everything that's broken down, this is all the hay and everything that's been broken down in here, is only a couple of inches, because over time, and you can actually see some grass clippings on top here because that was the last thing I added on top. So not just hay this year, I just added some grass clippings as well because that's a nice organic matter, but everything really sinks down. And here you go, there's some hay over here as the hay decomposes. One of the nice things as the hay breaks down though is you can see what it becomes over time. It's a form of compost here, so you can see bits and pieces of the hay, but just overall this is going to decompose. And I promise you, I have not come over here and I have not been adding a bunch of anything else other than hay, maybe a little grass, and we did add some quail waste last season as well, but it turns into this amazing organic matter over time. So one of the really awesome aspects of growing in a Ruth Stout bed, besides the fact that you're not dependent on having high quality native soil, and you don't have to worry about the stress of trying to dig through if you have a really clay soil or really rocky soil, something like that, is just how well you see improvement in the quality of the growing medium over time. I'm continuously adding hay year over year to the bed, so we have an always continually increasing amount of organic material. And the hay that I'm actually adding right now is hay that was used to cover our long bed where we had 15 varieties of potatoes growing this season. I'm just taking that old used hay and I want to add as much depth as I possibly can. Now, if I don't have enough of this hay lying around, I also have several bales of hay that I purchased earlier in the season that I'm going to add as well. Now, in talking about adding hay, that actually leads us to one of the most frequently asked questions that we get when we do a Ruth Stout harvest, which is, can we use things other than hay? For example, can we use straw? And my answer to that is absolutely. And I'll talk to you about one of the mistakes we made this season, so that gives you an idea why straw might be a good idea for some. For us, the primary reason why we've used hay, at least in our area, we can typically get pesticide-free hay from a local farmer for around $3 or $4 a bale. And so for us, that's a lot less expensive than the straw, which is harder for us to find, again, in this area, unless we go to a greenhouse and we spend about $8 or $10 a bale. If you have the ability to access some straw for cheap or cheaper than hay, I would say go for it. My understanding is that Ruth Stout had the best success with hay, and she could also get it for free or very cheap where she lived. So that's probably part of her rationale. Now, it is pretty windy out today, so I've come around the corner from the Ruth Stout bed in order to try to talk to you without the wind blowing our ears out. But one of the things that we did this year that was a bit of a mistake is when I was buying the hay, I went ahead and got some first cut hay. Now, the benefit of first cut hay, it should be more nutritionally dense. If you think about it, I think a good way to think about it from my point of view would be microgreens. And I know it's a weird connection, but With microgreens, the first cutting is the most nutrient dense, and then the subsequent cuttings are great, but they just are less filled with nutrients. And so when it comes to the hay breaking down, maybe there's a benefit to having that first cut hay. But the other side of it is that the first cut hay also has more seeds. And so this year we got the first cut hay, and we started seeing for the first time some problems with some weeds that we hadn't dealt with before. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. Now, if you can just continue to add hay on top of hay on top of hay, you can keep the weeds down anyway. But I would recommend, and our experience has been the previous 4 years, we've usually got second cut hay. Second or third cut hay, you're gonna have fewer weeds. And so that is something I think that can help out quite a bit. Now, that being said, it is the beginning of fall, and pretty soon the leaves are gonna be coming off our trees here in Zone 5, Wisconsin. And while we focused on adding hay for our Ruth Stout bed, if you have leaves, you could add leaves as well. The one thing I'll say about leaves, unlike the hay, is that they do tend to mat. And so that's not typically our favorite. If we're gonna add something like that, we may have to do a little bit of extra work, grinding them up a little bit if they're dry, just to try to prevent some of that matting. Again, that's why, one of the other reasons why our focus has been on hay. We haven't had as much problem with it matting or anything like that, and it's been pretty easy to spread out. We just have to, if it's coming from a bale where it might seem to be a matted or a little bit matted, as we're placing it down, we're making sure we shake it out as best we can. So you see I'm laying out all of this hay here, and that leads me to another question that's often asked, which is, do you fertilize your potatoes? Well, first, I want to show you the potato harvest, not the whole harvest, of course, but some of the results from the last couple of seasons. So you can see just how big our potatoes are coming out of here. Just the nice quality of what we're getting. Before I answer that question, for the first 2 years, we did add a tiny bit of soil underneath the seed potato at time of planting, and a little bit of fertilizer, specifically some mycorrhizal and some bone meal at time of planting. And I called it a modified Ruth Stout bed at the time. I haven't done that the last 3 years. Besides last season where we added the quail waste, which is some really good organic matter to add into our bed, and we just happen to have the benefit of adding, besides that, other than those first 2 years, we haven't added any fertilizer at all. Not at time of planting, not during the growing season. I haven't fertilized at all. The first 2 seasons, I was hesitant, I was unsure, I was nervous about the Ruth Stout method because we hadn't grown in that method before. At least in our experience anyway, it doesn't need it. And I think you just saw the results to prove that piece. All right, you can see I've added a good foot, I would say, of depth of hay here all along this bed. Now, of course, this stuff is going to compact over time as it breaks down, you know, just in general, it's gonna push down. So one of the benefits of prepping that bed now is that I've got, you know, several months, hopefully, before snow comes. But, you know, in the next 3 or 4 weeks or so, as that starts to compress, I can come in and add more hay. I want to give it as much of that material as possible in preparation for next season. I'm not doing any kind of fertilization. I'm not doing anything like that. I just need time to do its thing. But that leads me to another question that a lot of people have about watering. You can probably see the hay is damp because one of the few times that I water a Ruth Stout bed is at the time where I lay the hay out first. And that's because the last thing I need is for hay to be blowing everywhere. And if you don't wet it down when you first place it out there, and there's a windy day like today, that's exactly what'll happen. You'll get hay blowing all around. So I wet it then. Typically, right after planting, I water it a little bit. I don't overwater because, again, you don't want too much moisture until the potatoes themselves have rooted. But then throughout the growing season, last season as an example, I watered this bed down here 2 times. And I'll tell you, we had plenty of rain early on in the season. And while it did stop raining for about a month and a half, the hay itself holds in moisture so well that there's not really a necessity to come in and consistently water. And isn't that interesting? And isn't that a positive benefit? Whereas all my other beds, I really got to keep an eye on, especially my raised beds. My Ruth Stout basically takes care of itself because of how well the hay, and I'm sure straw would do the same thing, but the hay can hold in that moisture. Now, I promise you, harvesting potatoes from a Ruth Stout bed is so simple, and setting the bed up and prepping it for the next season is just as easy. It seems like there should be a whole bunch more to this video because, you know, we're prepping a bed that has been really productive for us in the Ruth Stout bed, and it's getting ready for season 6, if you will, and yet that's all there is to it. It is literally that simple. I really hope I got to some of those important, urgent, or maybe frequent questions that you have about growing in a Ruth Stout bed. If you have other questions, we have 5 years of experience, which isn't as much as some people, I'm sure, but it's enough for us to figure out some of the mistakes and some of the positives along the way. And we'd be happy to answer those questions. You just leave them in the comments. Well, hey, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And for those of you who have grown Ruth Stout or are considering it, let this be the sign that you should definitely be growing with the Ruth Stout method. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.